Leigh. I'm here at SoCo, and today we're going to do a Gable sew along, which actually I'm wearing now. So just a little secret, this is what it looks like when it's finished. And we're going to be using an industrial single needle machine for most of the stitching, and then a serger for all of the seam finishes. So it's a pretty nice shirt. It's got 2 sleeve options. You can have this regular one, which is just a pretty narrow sleeve, and then we have one that's really nice and full that has some volume to it. They both come in a pattern, so yeah, let's get going.
So here's all your pieces already cut out. We've got your fronts, your backs, your sleeves, all the plackets that we need, as well as all the facings that go on the sleeve edges, and your cuffs. So our basic tools here are snips. Use those all the time, a small little ruler for measuring seam allowances and things, a bone folder for points, turning points out, seam ripper, marking pencil, scissors, always have those. The first thing you're going to do is interface all your placket pieces and your cuff pieces. I use a pressing cloth. Your iron's pretty hot. You want to make sure you don't want to get the glue on your ironing board or your iron. I use the iron to press down. I try not to rub too much, so the interfacing, just takes a minute. Well, the first thing we're going to do here is sew our shoulder seams together. So you can see I'm laying my fronts to my back. These are right sides together. And then I'll just go ahead and show you as well that I'm going to go ahead and do the side seams. Since I'm going to be sitting at the machine, I can go ahead and do all those in one go. And you notice I don't really use pins on this kind of thing. It's a pretty easy thing to not pin, actually. And then we're going to do the same thing down the side seams. And then after this, I will head over to the serger and go ahead and clean finish all these seams as well. So you just want to make sure you give all those seams a nice press. I usually will press from the inside first and then flip it over and just make sure it looks nice from the outside as well. Next, we're going to prep the sleeves. These get eased in. There's no gather on these sleeve caps. I do make this a longer stitch length on this just to gather, and you can already see it's gathering. Johnny and I did have a discussion when we were putting in this, traditional patterns, especially like the big 4 pattern companies. They always traditionally would tell you 2 rows of stitches here for something like this, but this is eased in so minimally, actually. And if I were sewing this myself, I probably wouldn't put any of these stitches in, and I would be able to ease it in with my fingers. However, in the beginning of this, we did have the 2 rows, and then you could do 1 row. If you're pretty comfortable with putting in sleeves, we are showing you right here the 2 rows, but honestly, sometimes I don't even do that because it's really minimal, the easing in on this sleeve cap. So you can see once it gets sewn in, there's really, there's no gathers at all. So it's pretty simple. This is the slit that I went ahead and cut for the pleats that go down on your cuff. So you can see I'm folding these pleats towards that cut line. I think on our instructions it might be a little bit later, but I went ahead and did this just because it helped me remember which direction those pleats are going. Once I have that line cut, it's like, okay, both pleats will lay in the direction towards that line. And then next we're going to prep. So this is our bias that goes along that placket on your sleeve, and we just kept it in 1 strip, so you have to cut it into 2 strips, and then each one, and don't forget to go back to your regular stitch length, each one of those little pieces of bias are going to get sewn along your opening that you just cut. So you tack the pleats first. So that was just a little stay stitch I did there to keep those in place. And then you're going to see here that I'm going to sew this flat down. It's going to go all the way around that V. And, another thing I'll do sometimes as well is to pre-press that other edge. I do it afterwards in this situation, but sometimes I will pre-press it as well. Actually, generally I will. I think I was just kind of moving fast here on this one. um, but you can see here this gets stitched down to the point, and this is why we're using bias. Bias has a little bit of stretch to it, so you got to stitch a little further. I'm telling myself, just go ahead, keep going. And then once you get to that point, then you can pull it all kind of straight and flat behind you and in front of you, and you can continue down that. So there is a little bit of wrangling here if you've never done this before. It is easier than some, traditional kind of sleeve plackets that you might try sometimes. So this one is a little simpler version. And then you just continue down the length of that bias. And then what will happen is that is all going to get flipped and finished to, yep, there you go, to the outside of the sleeve. Right now we're working actually on the inside of the sleeve, so that when we flip it, you'll be sewing from the right side of the garment. That's just like an easier, to do that top stitching from the outside is just a little bit easier. So before we can do any of that, we give this a nice press. We're going to press a folded edge so that when you set back at the machine, your next stitching will be really easy. So you're pressing all of that seam allowance to become clean finished. And you can see this a little bit easier when it's at the machine. Just a second. So you can see it's a pretty small little bias edging here. So this has been turned now. I'm working on the right side of my fabric, and then you've got a little top stitch. I did put a little clip there just to kind of help me hold it. It's tiny. And I think I was complaining to Johnny that my big fingers just feel a little too big in this scenario with this 1/4 inch finished. It looks really pretty though, so you got to suffer through it sometimes. I do a lot of bag sewing, so sometimes I like this big, canvas and things that are a little thicker and sometimes for me easier to sew than these little dainty things, but it's a good challenge for me to get back into this type of, sewing. So yeah. So I'm just going to continue down the length of that bias again, just top stitching. So this, this is, you're going to see this on the outside of your garment, so you want to make sure this looks really nice. You always want the inside to look nice as well. You're not trying to hide any bad sewing, but so here, we do one little thing here to this placket. You fold it. This is all to the inside, and then we're going to do a little 45-degree stitch here, and this is what keeps it flat. So once it's on your body, then that placket will lay nice and flat because of that stitch, actually. So you can see this in just a second. I think we give you a little shot of it. So then when it's open, that folds over and lays flat on top of the other one. So we'll just give this one little nice final press here to make this look really nice, especially those pleats, and then that overlap on the opening. Now we're ready to go ahead and do the long seam that goes down, the entire sleeve length. So we're going to do, our 3/8 inch seam allowance here, down both sleeves, and then we will go over to the serger and clean finish that off. We're getting ready to put the cuff on here. So we'll put on the cuff before we attach it to the body of the garment. It just makes it a little bit easier working that way. So that's what we're doing. Once you've got that sewn, then you can press this, open. You've already serged it together, so you can't really press it open, but I use my fingers to kind of pull it apart, make it nice and flat, and then one, little press on the outside as well. I always do that, and then we're going to get ready to do our sleeve pieces. So these are our cuffs. You can also pre-press that one side that's not going to be attached right now. You could go ahead and press that 3/8 inch seam allowance, but we're going to start like this. So you have a notch there that is going to match up to the beginning of your placket. So match that notch because you want to be, really careful about starting at that point and not, just matching end to end. So we're going to stitch this on, all the way across the placket, and you've got your pleats in there, and this should finish again at the notch that's at the end. So you want to be really careful to match that notch to the end of your placket. And then we'll press that seam. You can press it open and then down towards the cuff, away from the body of the sleeve. So, and then the next thing we'll do is that we're going to press this edge. So this is the edge I said you could have pressed before. Sometimes I'll press it before. Usually I do press it before. So now we're going to fold this up. I did trim this down a little bit just because there was some bulk from that serging and everything, and it can get a little bulky inside the seam, so I trimmed out that stuff that's on the inside. But this folds down, so this is right sides together on the cuffs now, and you're gonna sew, both of those folded edges down. So you're kind of sewing together that part that had been extending off, like past your seam. You're stitching that together. And you can see this here. I'm going to actually snip the corner out of it. So I'll sew both of those before I snip. And once I have those stitched, then I'll snip and turn that with my bone folder, use that to get a nice point there. So snip off that excess there. And then here's the bone folder, which is great for using in those points. So at this point, all this stuff, we're turning it towards the outside of the garment. Remember, we're always going to be doing this top stitching, this final kind of top stitching. We're not doing like a stitch in the ditch kind of thing. We're just turning it to the outside of the garment and then top stitching it with a nice, 1/8 inch seam allowance. So you can see I'm kind of using my tools there to poke any little hairs because I did trim that down a little bit. It's kind of wanting to poke out, and that's fine. We just kind of get it stuck in there before we stitch. So this is, both sleeves. I went ahead and have finished both sleeves at this point, and so now we're going to start to attach the sleeve to the garment. So here I wanted to show you kind of what it looks like here inside the circles. So those are matched up. That's, right sides together. Working here, the sleeve is on the inside right now, and you're going to match notches. So the thing when you do these kind of little gather stitches, you want to match the notches, you match the shoulder notch as well, and then you're going to pull those threads to kind of fit your sleeve into that cap. Sleeves are made to have a little ease in them so that they can roll over the top of your shoulder. You need some volume there. This is a cool little trick with your pen where you do a little figure 8 with your thread just to hold them in place while you're moving those around. If you don't secure them to something, sometimes you'll just tie a knot. The pen's a nice little trick there. You secure one side and then you can adjust the other one. And then once you get it adjusted, you can do the same on the other side. And so then you're ready to stitch all that in. So, whenever you're sewing in a sleeve cap like this, something that is specifically not made to have a puff or, gathers up at your shoulder cap, you just want to be really careful with your easing in to not get any gathers. Often in the sleeve, you'll have to take it out and do it again because maybe you've gotten a pucker somewhere that you didn't know. Just, don't rush through a sleeve. It's one of the hardest things to fit on garments, and just, you just want to get used to getting those circles inside of each other, and sometimes it takes a little practice. You've checked that there's no puckers or anything there, then you can go ahead and serge off those edges and clean finish them, or bias, or binding, or however you're doing that. And then I'll just give a quick little press to all those seams. We've done both sleeves. I might do a final press on my cuff there, make sure everything looks nice. So now after we finally do that final press, we're getting ready to move on to our neck, and here I am pre-pressing that finished edge up. So that seam allowance, I'm going to go ahead and press it. Again, we're working from the inside of the garment here, and we've got some notches, and we're going to match the bias here to the edge of these and kind of move along the entire neckline with our bias edge. So using 3/8 inch seam allowance here, and again working from the inside of the garment so that when we flip this to the outside, that's where we will work with our top stitching. Go all the way. This is an end-to-end thing, and you know, if your bias stretches a little bit, because this is a bias, if it stretches a little bit, you can just snip it off. It's okay. It's not going to be too big a deal. You just want to make sure that you have enough there. So once I've got that on, then I give it a nice little press here before I fold it to the outside. Again, this is a narrow, it's a really pretty little finish here on the shirt, so it's going to finish right around a 1/4 inch around the neckline. And we'll do all that top stitching from the top, or right side of the garment. So next we're going to work on our hem. We're doing the hem here before we do the front placket, because it all gets kind of finished alongside that placket. So this is a 3/8 inch simple turned hem, so it's a 3/8 inch and then another 3/8 inch turned up. You know, sometimes working around the curve here, you do have to work, you know, kind of gently, and try not to stretch it too much as you go, and sometimes you do have to ease it in a little bit as you're sewing that, and sometimes the iron can actually help you with that. If you hit it with some steam, it kind of brings it in a little bit, so that can be nice. And then we will go and, yeah, we're going to hem this here just on our single needle machine. We're going to press this edge up again. You'll see a pattern here on the shirt. Pressing the edge up of these plackets. These are the 2 plackets that are going to go down the front, you know, for your button placket here. And you'll again see there's notches, so you want to match up those notches to where the bias, you know, starts there on your neckline. So one little bit is going to be hanging off. Put a clip there so you can just kind of hold it there while you're going, and then just make sure at the bottom that it's doing the same thing. And we're going to stitch this on to the front of your garment, working, you know, from the wrong side of the garment. And that's how that's going to look. And then we'll do the same thing as the cuff here. So this gets stitched together. You're going to stitch straight across that top there. It's 3/8 inch seam allowance with those folded edges, you know, sewn in place there. I will put a pin here, just kind of hold it for me. I made it a little bit easier for you to see what I was doing as I was sewing it. And again at the bottom, so the same thing as the top. Snip out the excess, and again flip these. plackets are sewn on, I will come through and hit it with the iron. You know, I do on a front placket like to press it open first, and then I will press it all towards the placket side instead of the garment side. And since we've already pre-pressed this other edge, this is a really nice, easy, we tuck all that in. There, I'm using my snips again to tuck in some stuff and give this a nice press. And then, unfortunately, we do not have the sewing for this, but somehow we lost that little clip. But what I did is that I went to the machine and just top stitched both of these plackets down, just like we did the cuffs. So again, I've also already set on my snaps, just so you know, it's going to be a little surprise there. But, so that's what the stitching looks like. It runs down the front of your placket.
Well, you kind of see here that I thought I was going to do some buttons. I had these beautiful little vintage gray glass buttons. Oh, but I think after looking at the chart, I had even marked the buttonholes. I used this Clover, chalk, refillable chalk pencil, which is pretty cool. Then I have my thread out here, and I have the buttons laid up, and I liked them originally, but now I'm kind of feeling like maybe I don't want to use them and instead want to do some snaps. I have some of these. This is cool. I love these like little vintage notions kits you can find always at like thrift stores or yard sales. Like I have tons of vintage things. Oh, here's another one I'll show you. It's really cute. This little postcard of somebody sewed on these vintage glass buttons, and I just love them so much. I can't use them or take them off the card ever. But these are just a basic snap, 2-part snap. And I'm kind of feeling like I might hand sew these on there just because I do really like what happened with my placket here. So you can see I used the back side of the fabric. It's going a different direction, and it's a little bit different, from the exterior of the fabric. So I really like it. It's just like a feature. So I don't know if I want to put even more on top of it. So those are some options. Like when you go to choose buttons, do you want it to stand out? Do you want it to blend in? All those things you can think about when you're thinking about what you want your buttons to look like. And just give me a minute and I'll figure out what I'm going to do.
So I'm just using a paintbrush here to rub off the chalk lines on the outside of my garment. And I did transfer those to the inside of the garment for my snaps. So these are going to be kind of hidden snaps, you won't see them from the outside. I'm putting a loop of thread here through my needles, so whenever I sew buttons on, I use 4 threads at one time. So, oh my gosh, my eyes, y'all. Really? I've forgotten it took me so many tries to thread that needle. Yep, that's what happens to your eyes. So anyway, so then each time I do this little trick where I wrap it around my finger. Don't know if that was too fast, but we do have some other sewing button tutorials if you want to see how to do those cool little knots and things around your fingers. But these are just snaps, front and a back, a prong. And these, I'm going to sew these on to my, to the placket. And I don't mind seeing my stitches on the outside. It matches my thread here on this little fabric that I have, so I don't mind it. Sometimes I want to keep that totally hidden, so I keep all those stitching to the inside. Of course, I don't want a big knot on the outside of my garment, but just a few little stitches I'm okay seeing. And yeah, this is me. Actually, I went outside and sewed the rest of these, so you can kind of see I'm sitting in my garden and sewing on buttons, which is a nice afternoon in the fall in North Carolina. So if you sat through the first sleeve, we thought we would go ahead and show you how the other sleeve works out. So this is the one that has a little more full volume. So we're going to walk you through just the sleeve part of that garment. A lot of it is really similar to the first one we did. So this is pre-prepping here, the cuff, and I'm going to go ahead and stitch this as well this time on this sleeve. So this is your little bias piece that goes on your sleeve opening. Go ahead and press those that get top stitched. Press that same allowance. Again, we're going to work in this sleeve cap here. So we're going to put our gathering stitch there in the blue, and this will help us ease this sleeve into that opening. Now, the difference here on this sleeve is that this is a 2-part sleeve. That helped us get some volume down at the cuff there. So you're going to have some notches, and 2 seams to sew versus the 1 seam that you would have on a regular kind of sleeve. This makes a really nice shaping here on this sleeve. It really worked out nicely on this pattern. So go ahead and single needle this, matching notches, and then you will go clean finish it at the serger. So at the bottom of your other sleeve, there is this notch right here, and you actually don't want to stitch all the way down on this. This is going to be your opening, much like we did on the other sleeve, but you're going to leave this open for that bias placket there. So just start at that notch and then stitch all the way up. Over to the serger. Again, we're just showing you one sleeve. You would be doing all of these, seams and everything on both sleeves. So at that place, you want to clean finish that. I just pushed it out of the way there so I could get my serger down without serging over, any of that seam allowance down there. So this is when we're going to do this bias edging. So again, working from the wrong side of the garment here, we're going to put those raw edges together, and we're going to stitch those down. And when you hit that seam, it is a little bit finicky. You kind of have to move that seam allowance out of your way as you stitch there. So you want to go all the way down to that point, and then once you get to that point, you can pivot, around the rest of your opening. I did end up trimming this down a little bit just because it's going to make it easier for me to sew. I trimmed it a hair. Sometimes you need to, sometimes you don't. This fabric was being a little widgy on me, so I thought it might help. So then we're going to flip all of this pressed edge to the outside of the garment now, and we're going to do a nice little top stitch here on this narrow bias edging. Make sure you tuck all of those little hairs in. And then once you've got that done, there's one little last stitch here that happens. Fold that in half, right sides together, and then on the wrong side, you're going to do a little 45-degree stitch right there. I'm just showing you with my seam ripper, and that's going to help everything stay nice and flat. Time now to gather in all this fullness here. You've got a lot of fullness coming into this little cup, so we're gonna just be careful here. We're gonna put in these gathering stitches first, and once you've got this stitch running all the way around, you're gonna start pulling those threads and easing that into the cuff. So you're gonna match your notch there with the edge of your sleeve and matching any notches that you have. We're going to start pulling this to fit. There should be a middle notch to match up with your seams, and then around the back side again I do this cool little figure 8 around my pin to keep your thread in place. I'm going to go ahead and pin on that other end, again matching the notches, putting my pin in place, and so I will continue to pull these threads until they match the cuff. And you just want to do this evenly. Make sure it's you know, not just gathered on one side more than the other. And so you can see here, I actually marked a notch on that because I had lost my notch somewhere. So that, feel free to do that, and then you can match it up to the seam. That way you can make sure that you're evenly gathering things in there. This just sometimes takes a minute when you've got a lot of volume. And then once we get this all though pinned and ready to go, then I'll start sewing. Remember, don't sew that part. Yep. Match the notch, and you're going to leave that little overhang there, and then we're going to start putting all this volume here into your cuff. You want to try to not push these around too much, you know, make sure they're nice and straight, your pleats. They have a tendency to kind of push towards, you know, towards you as you're sewing them, so make sure they're nice and straight. And this cuff here is really dramatic here, this volume coming into your cuff, so it's really nice. And yeah, you kind of start to see what this is looking like here. And what's going to happen next is that we're going to just give this little press before we do this final stitching here. We're going to fold up these edges here again. Remember, you've got your folded edges down, and we're going to stitch here across that seam allowance there, and we're going to snip the corners in just a minute. Go ahead and do both sides of that cuff, and remember, folded edges down and stitch straight down your 3/8 inch seam allowance. Points. And use your bone folder to make this nice corner here. And then since we've already pressed all this towards the cuff, we can kind of go straight into top stitching here. So, you know, you're going to be about 1/16 away from your edge here. You're pretty close to the edge. A lot of volume here, so just use your tools if you have to. Make sure everything's hidden away. There's no, you know, threads or things popping out. And again, as you sew this, make sure your pleats are nice and straight.
Very nice. That's nice.